I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about how to build a fabric palette in 5 easy steps. So we'll cover why creating a palette is so important for a cohesive wardrobe, the exact system I use for my seasonal color planning, and how this practice can transform both your sewing and your everyday style. All right, so our icebreaker today, Haley, have you ever bought a fabric in a really random color and found that you surprisingly ended up loving it?
Yes, this has totally happened to me. Years ago, I bought a cotton silk, gauzy twill fabric at Mill End, which is a local store here in Portland. And it is, I still have this top, kind of like a bright olive green, more like martini olive, not like drab olive.
Yeah.
And it was not a color that I really ever wore. And I thought it was kind of a gamble, so I made a bow top out of it because I didn't want it to spend too much time on something that I was not super sure about.
Yeah.
And I ended up loving it. And now it's a color I wear all the time. I used to wear a lot more of that drab green, and no more. Martini olive is my color.
It looks really good on you, too.
Yeah, now I have a handful of garments in that color. And I did something kind of recently with a purple sweatshirt fleece, but that has not yet become a garment, but I have good feelings about it.
This is a story about the color more than that particular martini olive green color, but I tried on the Leandra sample that we have here, which is in a color like that. It's like a chartreusey bright olive green, and it looked so good on me, the color, and I was like, why don't I sew with this color more often?
It's a really fun pop color, and typically cooler tones suit me a little bit nicer, but something about that color really, really does it.
Yeah, it's a nice one for my dark hair. I think it just makes my hair stand out or something.
Oh, I could totally see that. What about you? What's your surprise random color fabric?
I think I had this fabric that I bought randomly because I liked the color, which was a lilac purple silk. And I just bought it because I liked it, but it wasn't a color I normally wore very much. And then I made this was a long time ago, but I made a really pretty slip dress out of it. And I absolutely loved it. I just thought it was so pretty. And again, it was one of those, I guess those kind of bright pastel-y colors, just maybe I like the way they look with dark hair. It just makes my hair stand out or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I loved that dress. I wish I still had it, but I wore it to death. So
I do. I'm very specific about shades of purple, but I love a lilac.
Yeah. It was kind of a dusty, but not too dull lilac color. It was really, really pretty. So it happens. So if you see a fabric in a color that you absolutely love and you don't know why, sometimes you can break out of your palette and find something new to add. Well, if you have an icebreaker question for a future episode, you can leave it in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and we'll include it in a future episode. All right. So have you ever finished making something beautiful only to realize it doesn't actually go with anything else in your closet? I think we've all been there for sure. So for years, my approach to fabric shopping was basically just oh, pretty, with very little thought about how all those impulse purchases will work together. And sometimes that works out, like we just talked about. Sometimes you see something beautiful and it speaks to you. But other times, you just end up accumulating a lot of fabric that you don't use. You end up accumulating a lot of stuff that doesn't go together. So for me, the result was a closet full of what I call orphaned garments, just beautiful pieces that didn't coordinate with anything else, and so they rarely got worn. And my stash was even worse. It was just overflowing with all these gorgeous fabrics that somehow never made it onto my cutting table because they didn't quite feel right for any specific project. And I finally realized that what was missing was a more systematic approach to color and fabric planning. I needed to think about my wardrobe holistically instead of one random project at a time. So I kind of think of this as light structure. And that's when I started creating seasonal fabric palettes, and it completely transformed both my sewing practice and my wardrobe. And now it's just much easier to create clothes that I actually wear and love every day. So today, Haley and I are going to share the exact 5-step system I used to build a fabric palette. And by the end of this episode, you'll have a framework to create your own palette that reflects your personal style and works with your existing wardrobe. So Haley, do you find yourself drawn to the same colors over and over again, or are you all over the place with your fabric choices?
I think that my color palette and fabric stories matches yours. I think that's something that a trap a lot of people fall into when they start sewing, is that there's so much fabric out there and it's just like a playground of colors and textures and prints. And it's really easy when you first start sewing to go super overboard.
Yeah.
And buy things because you visually like them, not necessarily because you like wearing them. So over the years, I've really honed it in, and now I find myself drawn to a little bit tighter palette. It's definitely a little different in the spring and summer than it is in the fall and the winter. But I find that my palette's pretty standard, and then I bring in like kind of fun colors, and those kind of rotate in and out. And sometimes I'll like say goodbye to an old color and introduce new ones, but it's like more of a subtle evolution than this like really chaotic approach.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like more and more as the years go by, and maybe more as I do this process, I get more homed in on the colors that really speak to me and that kind of form the foundation of my wardrobe. And then, like you said, I can rotate some other things in and experiment a little bit with other colors.
Yeah, I think that it's great too, because I've just found I used to buy so much fabric all the time, and now I just save so much money because I know what I like.
Yeah.
What do you think makes it so hard for sewists to stick to a cohesive palette? Is it just that we love fabric too much?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because a couple things, like we love color and fabric and prints a lot of the time, or texture. Some people are more into texture. And buying fabric is exciting because it has so much potential. And so you see it and you just think of all the different things you could make with it. And that's exciting. And I think the other thing is that fabric is usually only available in limited quantities for a limited time. And so there's that FOMO that you get when you see something you really like, that it might be gone and you'll never find anything like it again. So I think that really creates a sense of urgency and a need to buy sometimes.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too, and I noticed this when I worked in a fabric store, is that they would come in, and I would have repeat customers, so I would get to know them and get to know their style, and the clothing that they would wear in oftentimes did not match the fabric that they would select.
Yeah.
And I think that because when we're purchasing fabric, especially when we're first learning to sew, we're not like seeing it in context.
Yeah.
So it's easy to kind of like divorce the fabric from the garment.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it kind of just as art. And sometimes it has this really interesting like way of opening up people's minds to different style perspective, and their style ends up evolving to kind of match their taste in fabric. And sometimes there's more of this like journey back to like maybe like what they're actually drawn to, or like a more middle ground. But I think it's like about like training your eye and your mind to be able to visualize the fabric in context.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Have you noticed any changes in your shopping habits since you started creating seasonal palettes?
For sure. Like you said, I buy less fabric now than I used to. I'll still buy something special if I find something that really I can imagine with all of my other fabric that I can kind of picture in my wardrobe, and that makes sense for me and my style. But I think creating seasonal palettes and the design your wardrobe process, which this is a part of in general, has really helped me to think about what my style is from season to season, what I actually wear, what I actually want to wear, what I actually want to make, and just to be a little bit more selective about what I bring into my closet and what I bring into my life. So I shop far less for fabric than I used to.
I noticed the same thing. And the other thing that I've noticed is that the things that I buy, I tend to use more quickly instead of just sitting in my stash for ages and ages, now that I have like a little bit more of a system and a palette.
Yeah, I think the design your wardrobe process generally helps me just to think more about what I'm going to make and how I'm going to use fabric and to buy with an intention. And there's just not a lot of room in there for those impulse purchases, although they happen from time to time. But I think even from a few years ago, things have changed for me quite a bit, and I'm just a lot more selective. All right, well, let's get into our tips. So if you want to try this out for yourself, and again, this is part of the Design Your Wardrobe process as a whole. So this is one of the weeks of Design Your Wardrobe. We work on creating a color palette and a fabric palette for the season that you're going to design for. So we're going to kind of go through that process right now. So the first step is creating a mood board for the season. So you start by gathering inspiration that resonates with you for the upcoming season. So this could include fashion images that catch your eye, colors and textures from nature, favorite places or travel memories, or even art and films that inspire you. I create my mood boards partially on Pinterest. I also use a program called Milanote, which lets you create kind of mood boards and palettes and drag things around really easily. But you can also use Instagram. You can use a physical bulletin board. You can use a digital tool like Canva, which is really easy to use. There's lots of different tools. And then I also create a physical analog mood board in my sewing studio as well. So the goal is really to collect images that feel right for the season ahead and really align with how you want to dress. Now, as you gather images, you'll notice patterns emerging. So you might be drawn to certain colors, textures, or silhouettes, and you'll notice this as you start to gather your inspiration together. And these patterns that you notice are really the gold. They reveal your authentic preferences rather than just fleeting trends, because I think we can all get caught up in just, oh, that's pretty, that's pretty, that's pretty, and get really caught up in the trends around us. But when you start to really filter things and create a mood board, you start to kind of see how your own personality and your own tastes can be reflected in what you're creating. So my advice is not to overthink this part. Just collect what genuinely appeals to you, not what you think should appeal to you. And your personal style is naturally going to shine through if you just trust your instincts.
Our next step is to shop your stash. So you're going to take an inventory of the fabrics that you already own that might fit into your emerging palette. This step is super crucial and it grounds your palette in reality and helps you to use what you already have. Gather up all of your potential fabrics and lay them all out together. And this is kind of like auditioning them for your seasonal wardrobe. Take photos from different angles and in different lights to see how the fabrics interact. You might be surprised at some of the combinations that you hadn't even considered before. I like to separate my fabrics into potential yes, maybe, and not for this season pile. I feel like this, sometimes if I get too caught up in like the yes or the no's, I lose track of something that actually has some good potential.
Mm-hmm.
So don't lose sight of your maybes. If you're feeling overwhelmed by your stash, you can just focus on pulling out 5 to 10 pieces that speak to you for this current season. You can always add more in later as your palette kind of evolves. This process often reveals things in your stash that you had totally forgotten about and fabrics that you haven't looked at for ages, but are totally perfect for your current vision. This actually happened to me, I think it was maybe 3 years ago. I was working on my fall Design Your Wardrobe, and I had every single fabric that I needed for my wardrobe plans in my stash already. And I had like a decent size wardrobe. I was making a lot of sweaters and I had some kind of lofty goals that I didn't necessarily meet, but I had all of the fabrics in my stash if I wanted to meet those goals. Sari, have you ever rediscovered a fabric in your stash and then it became like a favorite garment?
Oh my gosh, so many times. And I think this process really, really helps with that, just because of this step of going through what you already have and using that to form the foundation of your palette.
Mm-hmm.
So many times, like you, I've gone through and realized I had most of the fabric I needed to create all the things that I wanted. And I think if you approach it with this mindset of wanting to use what you already have as much as possible, then it actually makes you feel more creative because you have that kind of constraint around it of, I want to, for example, if I have 5 projects planned, I want to use fabric I already have for 3 of them, for example, then it just makes you see things in a different way and can help you to kind of visualize things in new ways and come up with more ideas. So I really love doing that. I've discovered a lot of times I'll think, oh, I need a certain fabric, like an eyelet fabric, for example. And then I'll go to my stash and realize I have like 3 or 4 that would fit the bill already. So this happens to me all the time. And I think, like you, I think it wasn't this last season, which is spring. I think maybe it was winter or fall, but I had almost all the fabrics that I needed to sew all the projects that I had in mind. So that's always really exciting to me.
Well, and it's kind of like this confirmation that you're on the right track, that you're drawn to things that you were drawn to in the past, which tells me that I'll probably like them down the line as well.
That's true too. So the next step is to gather some additional color swatches. So once you've shopped your stash, that's when it's time to fill in any gaps that are in your palette. So at this stage, I always collect more options than I'll eventually use because it's easier to edit down than to add more later. So here are 3 easy ways to gather swatches. First, you can order fabric swatches online. So a lot of fabric stores offer inexpensive swatch services. You can usually order swatches for very little cost and very little shipping cost. Some of my favorites include Stone Mountain & Daughter fabrics, Blackbird fabrics, and then Mood has a big selection, so you can often find a lot of things there, and they do swatches as well. Second, you can visit your local fabric store. So just spend some time cutting small swatches because most stores are really happy to provide these. At one of our local stores, Milland, oftentimes they'll even have little swatches attached to some of the bolts that you can just take. But oftentimes you just bring it to the fabric counter and ask if you can have a swatch, and they'll give it to you. Or you can purchase small amounts of fabrics you're considering if you're pretty sure that they will work in your palette. So maybe if the fabric store doesn't offer swatches, I've never been to a fabric store that won't cut a swatch for you, but if they don't, or if you want to see, for example, whether it has the right drape, you kind of want to play with it a little bit. Sometimes you can just buy a small amount of it so you can kind of play around with it a little bit more. And then third, you can grab paint chips from the hardware store. These are free and they offer really precise colors in a very convenient, portable form. So I like to use these a lot when I'm starting to visualize what my palette might be, but I don't have specific fabrics in mind. So if I need to look for example, I want to make a red sweater, I need to look for a red sweater knit. Rather than spending the time to find the exact one I want when I'm creating the palette, sometimes I'll just use paint chips and use that as a stand-in for a fabric that I'll spend more time looking for in the future. I actually keep a little swatch wallet in my purse with my current palette colors so that if I do go fabric shopping, I know what I'm looking for, and I find that to be really helpful. You could also just keep a picture on your phone, something like that. It's really, really helpful just to have it on you when you're shopping. And that way, if I happen to stop by the fabric store, I can easily see if something's going to coordinate with my plan. Especially helpful for prints because obviously, prints often have multiple colors in them, and it's sometimes hard to visualize if you don't have your palette with you, whether it'll fit with the other colors. So I find that really helpful. It's like having a little color consultant with you all the time. Do you carry swatches with you, Haley, when you shop?
I don't carry physical swatches with me unless they're like fabric swatches I'm trying to match. I do like to keep a screenshot or like a picture of my color palette on my phone. If I'm earlier in the design process, I have the Pinterest app on my phone and I'll just look at my mood board and kind of lift some of the colors from there. Because sometimes when you're looking for swatches, you may not have that like color palette totally nailed down.
Yeah.
And just having a collection of images to look at can help kind of remind you of what you're looking for.
Yeah.
All right. Our next step is to create a structured palette. So now comes the fun part, arranging your collection into a cohesive palette. I find it helpful to organize colors into 3 categories: neutrals, basics, and statement colors. So our neutrals are our wardrobe workhorses. These are the colors that go with almost everything else. Think black, navy, gray, white, ivory, beige, brown, even olive. Most wardrobes need at least 2 or 3 neutrals as a foundation. Next, you have your basics, and these are the colors with a little bit more personality than neutrals, but they're still versatile enough to wear really frequently and pair with other kinds of colors as well. They might include things like burgundy or forest green, rust, mustard, dusty blue. These are all really versatile colors that can be an almost neutral. Finally, you have your statement colors. These are your bold, bright, or unusual colors that add a little bit of excitement to your wardrobe. They might be worn a little bit less frequently, but they bring joy and interest to your outfits. For example, my current spring palette includes for neutrals, navy, cream, and light gray. For my basics, I have my olive green, my martini olive green, dusty blue, and a petal pink color. And then my statement colors are red and kind of a vibrant cobalt blue. This gives me enough variety to create interesting outfits while ensuring that everything works together really harmoniously. I like to think about how each category mixes with the other. So making sure that like my neutrals work really well with my statements as well as with my basics. Do my basics work well with my statements? This might be less important to some people, but I really want to be able to like mix it. I don't like to sew a lot of things. So the things that I do sew, I want to make sure I can wear with like everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sari, what's your current palette looking like?
My palette for spring. So I did a video about what I'm sewing for spring. So if you want to see my whole palette, you can go look at it. But my palette it's a little bit more varied than it usually is, but it's kind of the same colors I always wear, which are black and cream are kind of my neutrals that I pretty much always include in my wardrobe plans because I love to wear black and I love to wear like whites and creams and ivories. More of that light palette in the spring and summer, and then more of the blacks and some chocolate brown in the fall and winter. And then for my basics, I've got like a denim blue I do wear and like a navy, a dark denim blue. And then one thing I incorporated this season that is kind of a little bit different for me is a yellow, like a soft, almost neutral yellow, like beigey yellow. That came from something I already had in my closet that I wanted to try and pull out and wear more, which is a pale yellow beigey blazer, vintage wool blazer that I had. And then I've got some pink, which is another favorite of mine, and red is always my statement color these days. I love red. I'm wearing a red sweater right now. I love it. I think red goes with everything, so it's one of my favorite statement colors to include. And then I have some prints this time, and I think that's something that some people struggle with a little bit is how do you include prints when you're creating a palette like this? So we have a worksheet for you to put all these colors into these categories, and there's a section for prints in there, and it really helps you to visualize how the prints you might have in mind will go with the rest of your palette. So I had a couple of floral prints in there, which did end up making it into my sewing projects this season. And I find that to be really, really helpful too. So let's go to the final step, which is to evaluate and adjust your palette. So this step is to step back and honestly just assess your palette and see it. Does it feel like are you actually going to wear these colors? So here are some questions to ask yourself. First, does this palette reflect my personal style? If you typically wear all black, but you've created a palette of pastels, then something might be off. Second, is there enough variety? A palette of all neutrals, for example, might be too limiting, while too many statement colors might not be practical for you. Third, does it work with my existing wardrobe? Your handmade items should, integrate with ready-to-wear pieces that you already own and love, and handmade things that you already own and love. And then fourth, does it suit my lifestyle? So consider where you spend your time and what activities really fills your days. And then finally, does it bring me joy? This is perhaps the most important question. Your fabric choices really should excite you. And I think the Design Your Wardrobe process helps you to kind of think through all of these questions as you go through the 3-week program. But those are just some questions that you can kind of pose to yourself to help you really evaluate what you're creating. And don't be afraid to make adjustments. So when I created my winter palette last year, I initially included kind of a bright, kind of more burgundy-ish purple as a statement color because I thought it looked really beautiful with my neutrals. But then after some reflection, I realized that I rarely wear purple, and I swapped it for more of a deep blue that felt a lot more authentic to my style. So remember, there are no wrong palettes. There are only palettes that don't feel right for you. So just trust your instincts. Haley, have you ever had to adjust your palette after realizing that something wasn't working?
Oh, definitely. I've definitely made some bad decisions over the years. And something that I've started doing when have incorporated a new color into my palette, one that I'm not quite used to wearing, I make sure that I'm selecting a garment that, one, is not like a big money or time investment.
Mm-hmm.
And then I make kind of like an audition garment for myself. So just like you audition colors in your color palette when you're in like the ideation phase, you can also like actually audition them in your wardrobe. And I also try to make something that, one, I know I'm going to like the way the garment looks on my body. So if I don't like it, I know that it's the color. And something that works well with a lot of things that I have. That way I can wear the color in a few different outfits and just get a feel for it before I go and invest more money on fabric, more time on making a garment. So creating those like low stakes audition garments can be really great. So something like a t-shirt, like a bow top, like the green one that I talked about earlier in this episode, have been like really handy tools. And then I don't feel like so bummed out if it's a flop.
Yeah.
Because I'm treating it like a fun little experiment.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think that's a really helpful way to think about it. All right, let me recap our 5 steps to building a fabric palette from today. 1 is to create a mood board for the season to gather visual inspiration. 2 is to shop your stash to see what fabrics you already have that might work. 3 is to gather additional color swatches to fill in any gaps. 4 is to create a structured palette with neutrals, basics, and statement colors. And 5 is to evaluate and adjust your palette to make sure it truly reflects you. So what's your takeaway from today's episode, Haley?
I think that my takeaway, and something that I've been thinking about in terms of color as I've been working on my summer wardrobe plans, is I feel like there's this middle ground. There's like the really like chaotic approach, buy everything, have a chaos closet.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, which I've definitely leaned really far into this in the past, is having such a honed in palette that it just becomes a sea of the same.
Uh-huh.
Like, I don't know. I think one of the beauties of doing this process every season and doing it repeatedly is I think you get to find that really sweet spot in the middle. And that sweet spot is going to be really different from person to person. And I feel like after years of doing this, I've just started getting to a place where I have a really good compromise between the fun colors that make me happy to look at, and then those colors that are my comfort colors that I feel really good in myself and in my body. And it's not like something that happened overnight, but it is something that happened because I have a process for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel the same way as you. And I also think that this has brought up the idea that it's really helpful to have that foundation of things that you love. And I think that's true for color. It's also true for styles and just what makes you feel really good. And then to give yourself that room to play and to find new things, which is why I think it's helpful to do a process like this every season and make it iterative rather than just trying to define your style one time and stick to that forever or for a long time. I think that's really hard to do, but sewing offers us this opportunity to kind of constantly refresh and reframe. And doing a design process like this, I think, helps you to make the most of that experience. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I think it's really, really helpful. And if you're excited about creating a more intentional wardrobe through palette planning, I'd like to invite you to check out our free Seamwork Sewing Planner. It's really the perfect tool to help you put these ideas into action. So I mentioned Design Your Wardrobe several times in this episode, and the Seamwork Sewing Planner is what we use throughout the Design Your Wardrobe process. So it's kind of a free preview of what we offer in the program. And the planner includes pages specifically for designing your color palettes, for planning projects with fabric swatches, and then for sketching complete looks. And it's basically everything we talked about today in a really beautiful printable format that you can use again and again. And it's completely free. You can download it right now at seamwork.com seamwork.com/go/planner. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And if you like this episode, we'd love it if you would leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your platform of choice. We love to read your reviews and hear from you all. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to become part of the Seamwork community, head right over to seamwork.com to learn how to join. And that's it for us this week. I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.